over voter identification is now focused on a courthouse in Philadelphia. State Supreme Court justices there must decide whether to enforce a law requiring voters to carry photo ID in order to have their say at the ballot box. Critics, and there are many, consider it nothing more than an attempt by mainly Republicans to block one of the basic principles of democracy. Pennsylvania is just one of many states where this fight is brewing, only weeks before the election. With me now, NBC News correspondent Ron Allen, who has been covering the story in depth for some time now. For those who do not know the backstory, give it to us in a nutshell.
Pennsylvania has a new law. You have to have one of a handful of types of voter ID to vote, a driver's license, a passport. There are estimates that could cause problems for up to 800,000 voters who don't have a picture ID, and the Democrats claim it's an attempt to give the state to Mitt Romney, and the Republicans say it's all about protecting the integrity of the ballot.
Let's start there. The integrity at the ballot box.
Right. This is the thing everybody brings up because there's no evidence of fraud in Pennsylvania or any other state, especially people showing up to vote as somebody else, impersonation at the ballot.
Yeah.
But the supporters of these laws say that's really not the issue. They claim that there's widespread fraud in registration, and this will clean up the rolls, they say. But all this is laced with heavy politics and heavy symbolism, because you have civil rights activists claiming that this harkens back to poll taxes, literacy tests that were designed to keep minorities and others from voting in the bad old days. And they say this is yet another example of that. And when you look around the country, it's not just voter ID laws. There have been efforts to curtail early voting. There are attempts to change the rules for voter registration. And when you put it all together, many Democrats say it's an attempt to basically change the rules of the game to give Republicans an advantage, particularly in swing states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, and elsewhere.
We're talking about Pennsylvania here. There are 31 states that have voter ID laws on the books now. They were struck down in Texas and part. They were struck down in Wisconsin and part. How does this Pennsylvania law compare to those?
It's very strict because you have to have a photo ID. Those other 31 states, and many of them, you can use a utility bill as ID. You can use a birth certificate as ID.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania and a handful of other states, you need a picture ID. What's more, in Pennsylvania, if you don't have the picture ID, you'll get a provisional ballot. And the ballot will be counted only if you hand in a photo ID at some point down the line. So it's very tight. It's all complicated, but at the end of the day, that's what the opponents of this law are objecting to. They say that it will disproportionately affect minorities, elderly, students. In the case of students, the law says you need a college ID that has a specific expiration date. You'd be surprised there's a number of schools that don't do that.
Right.
And of course, in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, students voted heavily for President Obama.
6 Supreme Court justices in Pennsylvania. Any inclination at this point how they might go? In
Pennsylvania, they happen to elect their judges. 3 are Democrats, 3 are Republicans. 1 can't vote because she's been charged with corruption. So a tie is likely to be a tie, and frankly, the law is likely to stand with a 3-3 tie. And the protests are likely to continue right up to Election Day.
Ron Allen, thank you so much for that. Appreciate all your work on these stories, too. Thank you again, sir. I want to go ahead and bring in Kathy Cohen. She's a professor of political science at the University of Chicago. She is also founder of the Black Youth Project. Kathy, good afternoon to you. I know that you just released a study with some staggering numbers. 700,000, I understand 700,000 young minority voters could be left out of this November's election because of voter ID laws. How big of an impact is that?
Well, I think it's incredibly significant. It's significant, I think, for 2 in particular reasons. One is just the number. If you think about 8 million young people of color voting in 2008 and 700,000, I mean, and that's a conservative estimate, 700,000 young people of color being denied the right to vote in 2012, you know, these are staggering numbers. But it's also, I think, staggering because of what it means for our democracy. Since 2004, we've seen an increase in the number of young people of color who have gone to the polls to vote, significantly among African Americans and Latinos. And now in 2012, we see people really restricting the franchise like we've seen in the past, and it's very disheartening.
And I've said this before, whatever your politics, you would think that most folks who care about this country would want to get as many people to the polls as possible, whatever your politics. Which groups are hurt most by this besides young people?
Well, I think clearly, again, I want to emphasize young people, but young people of color who, for example, may be maybe more mobile and therefore less likely to have the standard photo ID, state-issued ID that in fact will be required. We know that the elderly will also be impacted by these laws. We know that individuals with less income who are also more mobile will be less likely to kind of present the type of state-issued ID. And so we're really going to see kind of the demobilization of some of our most vulnerable and marginal citizens on Election Day.
This is the question that a lot of folks ask who support these types of laws.
Right.
How hard is it, and why is it so hard for someone under the age of 30 especially to get a photo ID?
Sure. Well, I think that's one question. Why is it so hard? But the other question is, why do we even have these laws? So let's answer the first question. It may not seem hard for those of us who get on airplanes all the time, who use credit cards and have to show a photo ID, but not everyone lives their life in that way. So we're not saying, in fact, that you have to kind of take airplanes to be able to vote. We're saying that this is a guaranteed right. For young people who might have, for example, a driver's license, it might not be a valid driver's license. It might not have their accurate information with regards to their address. Young people also are quite mobile, and so they may have their address from 2 apartments ago.
Sure.
So it's also the fact that many young people, there was a recent study from Circle that suggested that 44% of young people have no idea about if they need a photo ID or not. So it's not just that they don't have it. Many of them don't even know if they do need one and if they're going to be able to kind of get one in time to vote.
Kathy Cohen, thank you so much for the insight, and thanks for the work that you're doing as well with the Black Youth Project.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.